In Germany, dozens of people remain in custody after raids across the country on Wednesday. The targets were suspected supporters of a far-right movement that rejects the legitimacy of the German state. The federal prosecutor said those detained fantasized about forming a new German army and installing a minor aristocrat as leader of the country.
It is the biggest anti-terrorism raid in Germany for many years. On Wednesday morning, some 3,000 police raided more than 100 properties in several German states and arrested 25 people, all of them suspected members or supporters of the so-called Reichsbürger movement. Their goal, a coup d'etat in Germany. They wanted to overthrow democracy.
The arrested suspects are united by their rejection of state institutions in Germany. The arrested suspects believe in conspiracy myths consisting of different narratives, from the Reichsbürger ideology as well as the QAnon ideology.
The network was made up of both a political and a military group, according to German authorities. They had planned to invade the German Bundestag and use violence. Germany's Interior Minister, Nancy Faeser, said the investigations provided a glimpse into the, quote, abyss of a terrorist threat from the Reichsbürger milieu. Who wouldn't agree on a day like today, where there's one of the biggest raids against far-right's efforts aimed at attacking our state, that polarization is on the rise and we have to defend our democracy every single day.
Zunimmt und wir jeden Tag unsere Demokratie aufs Neue verteidigen müssen.
If they had succeeded, this man was to become the new head of state. Heinrich Reuss, a descendant of an aristocratic family from eastern Germany who still uses the symbolic title of Prince Heinrich XIII. The entrepreneur from Frankfurt is said to be the ringleader. She would have been installed as the new justice minister, Birgit Malsack-Winkemann, who was a member of the German parliament for the far-right Alternative for Germany party until last year. She has since resumed working as a judge at a Berlin court. Efforts to remove her from her position because of her involvement with far-right extremists failed earlier this year. But the court confirmed that she was released from her duties on Wednesday. The Reichsbürger, a far-right extremist, deeply anti-democratic movement. Its members reject the German state and its democratic system and are prone to violence. German authorities estimate that the scene consists of some 20,000 people. Between 2015 and mid-2017 alone, more than 10,500 crimes are said to have been committed by so-called Reichsbürger.
For more on this, joining us now from London is Julia Ebner. She's with the Institute for Strategic Dialogue and author of the book Going Dark, The Secret Social Lives of Extremists. Julia, has the Reichsbürger movement been underestimated?
Well, to some extent, yes. I would say that the authorities in Germany have increasingly focused also on the Reichsbürger movement, and they created actually a new category for classifying anti-government extremism, or they call it democracy delegitimizing extremism, last year in 2021. So there has been a rising awareness because the movement has grown and has expanded massively over the last few years. The origins of the Reichsbürger movement are already in the 1980s, but really in the last few years they have really gained ground and have also become more dangerous and radicalized towards violence.
Okay, you say they've become more dangerous. How dangerous are they?
They are, well, the problem is that we have in Germany, we have around 20,000 Reichsbürger, and 5% of these are estimated to be prone to violence, according to the police and to the security services. So that means we have at least 2,500 people who might be prone. And of course, in this plot, we saw that there is a very strong overlap also with the QAnon, the conspiracy myth community of QAnon, where we have also seen a high willingness to resort to violence, not just in Germany, but also abroad. In the US, of course, we had the ties to the January 6th storming Capitol riots. And in Germany, this is not completely new, because even a few months before the Capitol riots, there was an attempted storming of the German parliament, and there was a high involvement of Reichsbürger and of QAnon adherents there. So this doesn't really come as a surprise, but it's still shocking to see the large scale of this operation and of this plot.
Now, the people involved are said to be conspiracy theorists who reject the modern German state. Is there an upward trend of these sentiments in Germany in general, you think?
I'm afraid so, yes, because there is a very, unfortunately, has been now really a rising anti-establishment resentment within the German population that is, of course, mirrored in other parts of the world. But there is a higher, recruitment potential for movements like the Reichsbürger and also QAnon, where we've really seen these movements expand a lot in Germany. And Germany was particularly prone to these conspiracy myths that are, of course, combining old conspiracy myths of the Reichsbürger movement and wanting to re-establish the pre-World War II borders and not believing in the legitimacy of the current state and the current democracy, and combining those older elements of the Reichsbürger movement with new QAnon conspiracy myths that then take this onto a global level, where they would blame the so-called global elites, and would also often add anti-Semitic elements to these narratives.
Now, you have researched radicalization on both ends of the spectrum, if you will. So what are the main reasons for people to become really radicalized?
It's, of course, usually quite complex, and there's not one single profile for people who become radicalized towards violence. What we've seen, and what I also saw in my undercover investigations within different extremist groups, is that very often individuals would face some kind of identity crisis, and that can be caused and triggered by bigger crises, like now with the pandemic and with the of course, the war, the Russian war in Ukraine, and the economic and energy crisis in Germany, and globally, there has been a really a higher proneness in the population to becoming radicalized. So it's often, of course, these movements often offer some kind of antidote to loneliness, but also to uncertainty, to a sense of a lack of perspective that many people were facing, especially with the socioeconomic and also mental health consequences of the pandemic and of these various crises that we've seen in the past few years.
Julia Ebner, they're an expert on radicalization and extremism. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Political correspondent Thomas Sparrow is with me now. Now, prosecutors said they expect more arrests to follow. What can you tell us?
Absolutely. This is not the end of this ring, of this group. And according to what authorities have released so far, they seemed to have been at least relatively organized. It was not something that they had just planned in the last few weeks. It was a group that was apparently formed at the latest in November 2021. It had already a political arm with a cabinet basically formed. It had a military wing as well, which the goal of which was to not only recruit people, especially among the German military, but also to conduct military training with weapons. And we already saw in that report what kind of people belonged to this group. So it was certainly a very important development yesterday by the German government, by German authorities in particular. But as you correctly point out, from what we've heard so far, this doesn't seem to be the end. More arrests are expected and the investigations are set to continue.
Now, a plot to overthrow the German government. How close were we really to a coup here?
Well, that's something that we don't know exactly, but authorities have pointed to the fact that they were organized and in an advanced stage. And what I mentioned about the structures in place that this group already had point to that advanced stage. And the fact that they were also linked to this organization, the Reichsbürger movement, which is really profoundly anti-democratic, which rejects the existence of the German state as we know it so far, points to the fact that they had really concrete goals. Now, How possible those goals were, that's another question altogether. How realistic those goals were, achieving those goals, is another matter altogether. But they were at least planning it, and those plans were certainly, according to authorities, in an advanced stage.
And they included terror attacks, probably. Isn't that the real threat?
That is certainly part of the real threat, but it goes beyond that. It goes really targeting Germany's democratic institutions, trying to storm the German parliament, trying to replace the German state as we know it. So it goes beyond just terror attacks. It really affects the German state as we know it. And the Reichsbürger scene, which has been linked to this group, is actually known to be prone to violence. They have an affinity to weapons, according to authorities, and only last year there were over 1,000 crimes linked to that scene. So that's also a reason why authorities went in those raids with over 3,000 officers, and why they believe there was certainly a potential of violence there.
You mentioned this Reichsbürger movement, conspiracy theorists, really, who reject the modern German state. How prevalent are these thoughts in German society?
Well, if you just speak about the Reichsbürger, I wouldn't say they're very prevalent. We're talking about 21,000 people that are directly or indirectly linked to this. The bigger question is to what extent far-right extremist views are prevalent in Germany, and not only in Germany, but within German democratic institutions, within politicians, within the judicature, within the German military. That is the big challenge for German authorities, and that's the reason why German authorities have said on various occasions that the threat from the far-right, from the extremist far-right in Germany, is the biggest threat to German democracy now.
DW's political correspondent Thomas Sparrow. Thank you very much, Tom.